Hello world, hello internet, hello people who are interested in Congress. We're talking here about what Congress does, the mechanics of Congress, and we're starting with legislation. Now, of course, you know that Congress has three specific roles, but we haven't got a chance to be dealing with all of those. We will specifically here look at legislation. However, having said that, let's make the observation first that all of these functions can either be symmetrical, that is between the House and the Senate, or indeed asymmetrical. And if we rattle through those very, very quickly, legislation and spending, this is a parallel process. Both houses need to pass everything, and both of them need to override the presidential veto with a supermajority. On the other hand, when it comes to legislation, the asymmetry comes with money bills. These have to start in the House of Representatives because the House of Representatives is perceived to be the more democratic of the two. And so, obviously, legislation determining spending and the raising of funds is supposed to start there. In terms of representation, subtle differences in that one represents a district and the other represents a state. And, of course, different terms, 2 years in the House, 6 years in the Senate. When it comes to constitutional amendments, well, the supermajority is required in each. We know that, and in declarations of war, both of them need to do that, and both of them are responsible for the oversight of the executive. However, when it comes to advice and consent, that's an exclusive role of the Senate, and they are involved in the ratification of senior executive and judicial appointments, and indeed the ratification of treaties, and I've made that point twice for reasons I'm not sure about. Anyway, there are also, when it comes to oversight of the executive, subtle differences in the impeachment process. The House decides if there's a case to answer, and then the Senate hears that trial. But we'll worry about that when we come to look at oversight itself. So let's come back and look at legislation. All legislative powers, herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. Now, a couple of things. First of all, Congress is designed not to pass law. It has a limited range of authority, and we can see that if we look at Article 1, Section 8, and what we find there is that the role is limited basically to national defense and regulating trade. Everything else is supposed to be dealt with on a state basis, okay? The general idea here being that the states precede the union and the union exists to serve the states. That's so important. And do please look at my What Is It with Congress presentation to get a closer or perhaps a better idea on what this actually means. In order to make sure that nobody missed the point, they made the process for passing laws deliberately complicated. This was by no means a mistake. Congress is not supposed to work. It's not supposed to pass laws unless those laws are utterly necessary. And this is really what gets in the way. We've got a bicameral structure, and both of those are equally important, equally alike in dignity, and there's no way for one of those to impose its will on the other. There's no equivalent, if you will, of the UK's Parliament Act. Parliament Act. Acts, really, rather than parliaments. Parliament Act of 1911 and 1949. And then within those models themselves, we've taken a bicameral system, we've got a House and we've got a Senate, and then we subdivide that further with a network of committees, each of which is really interested only in furthering its own cause. Then we take the legislative process, and the legislative process is absolutely horrible. The bill needs to go through like that. From the bill to the act, it's a horrible thing, and it's much more likely that at any point a bill dies than it actually makes it all the way through. So death to bills. That's really what Congress is all about. Congress is where bills come to die. And in case this thing here isn't complicated enough, we've then got the filibuster and we've got the presidential veto. So again, Congress is not designed to make the legislative process easy. Contrast that with our system. In our system, we've got a parliament that's dominated by the executive. We've got a parliament with an inbuilt majority for the executive. We've got a second chamber that can be trumped because it's not democratic. And it just goes on and on and on. The UK system is designed to pass laws. The American system is designed to make it very, very difficult to pass laws because most laws should be passed by the state, because local laws for local people, and generally the fewer laws the better. A general principle of the American system being the government that governs least governs best. So we have got three different levels of dysfunction in terms of the congressional, in terms of Congress passing law. The system is a mess. The mechanics are a mess, and then we've got particular bugs that are in the system making life even harder. Now, I'm going to go through all of those, and hopefully we'll find out exactly why it is that Congress finds passing laws so difficult. So as I said, structurally we've got two houses, both alike in dignity, and neither the House can't trump the Senate can't trump the House. That means that any legislation needs to be agreed in exactly the same form by both houses before it can actually enter the statute books. And we saw that in graphic detail when we were looking at detail at Obamacare and the way in which that the incredibly torturous and extended route that had through both houses, involving filibusters and reconciliation bills, and an absolute mess. And then at the same time, the chambers themselves are fragmented, and then we've got committees and subcommittees and subcommittees, and it just goes on and on and on. And that just makes it very, very difficult for anyone to impose any sort of shape or organization on this thing, unless they really, really have to. And that is a theme that we will keep coming back to. Legislative process, the mechanics, well, we saw that, how complicated that route is, and we saw that all the way along there's multiple opportunities for the bill to die. There are all of those veto gates. There's the House Rules Committee and the House of Representatives, the filibuster in the Senate. We know all about the filibuster and indeed the presidential veto. We know that this is outrageously complicated because this is a vastly dumbed down version. If we look at this is much more comprehensive. And what we can see here is every time we've got a red hand here, this is a veto gate. This is an opportunity for the bill to die. Now, the key point here is that you don't necessarily need to know the committees follow the calendar, and then it goes to debates, and then it goes to budget, and then obviously if you do know that, it's not going to do you any harm at all. What you really need to know, however, is that this process is just ridiculously complicated, and in the normal run of things, there's virtually zero chance of any legislation making it all the way through here. The legislation only gets passed under certain circumstances, and those circumstances are such that Congress is required to compromise, coordinate, and cooperate. And those are the three ideas that we will keep coming back to again and again and again. When Congress is prepared to compromise, coordinate, and cooperate, then frankly anything is possible. But if those aren't happening, then frankly the chances of a bill getting halfway into this is extremely unlikely. It requires compromise, coordination, and cooperation. Here's a list of veto gates. I'm not going to go through them all. You don't need to know them all. Obviously, the more you have, the stronger your case is going to be. All you need to know is that the path for a bill is far from clear. In fact, it's strewn with opportunities and traps for the unwary. So, when it comes to drilling into this particular thing here again, let's go down further into the operations and find out, in addition to the structures and the process, why it's such a mess. And what we find is that Congress itself is just a mosaic of competing interests. And here we're talking principally about the committees. These are in it largely for themselves, and they are unmanageable. There is very little any sort of central authority can do to try to impose order or shape on this process. Now, I'm talking here in a very, very broad sweep of things. You need to make sure that you're comfortable understanding what this means, what it means when I say that it's a mosaic of competing interests. What I say when I say that the House Speaker is virtually powerless, the Minority Leader is virtually powerless. And the reason really is this: the whole thing is horribly partisan. Ideological divisions between the parties are significant, but what's more significant is this idea of the squeezed middle, the way in which moderate candidates have been squeezed out by a combination of a very, very partisan media and the primary system. If you gerrymander all of your states, or all of your districts, or you can't gerrymander a state, if you gerrymander your district, then the contest is not between the Republicans and the Democrats, but it becomes within one party. So a gerrymandered state, if it's a Democratic state, that's going to be a contest between the Democrats, and of course the contest there will inevitably go to the ideologically pure candidate, because the people who come out and vote in these are the ideological zealots. So it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican district or a Democratic district, victory in that primary will go to the most ideologically pure candidate, and as a result the middle gets squeezed out, whether it's Petri or Moran, who were at the conference this year, or Brain and Bono, who were at it last year. The squeezed middle is where all of these moderate candidates just get shunted to the sidelines by a combination of blue on blue fire, blue media on blue party fire, and the fact that no moderate candidate is ever going to win a primary because the morons come out and vote in it. And of course, the fact that we are subject to this constant campaign means that Congress is constantly in the business of looking over its shoulder and saying, well, who's watching me? Who's going to vote for me this time? And of course, with the involvement of these special interest groups, or pressure groups in the old UK form, that just means that cooperation, compromise, and coordination are virtually impossible. All of these things mean that there's no way that anyone's going to compromise or cooperate or indeed try to coordinate any action, particularly if we've done away with earmarks. Earmarks were perhaps the most effective way of getting past all of these vested interests, but no, the moral police have said earmarks are bad, and as a result, we're not allowed to bribe legislation through Congress. Whether you like it or not, this is how legislation used to get passed. And of course, the earmarks were within the gift of the committee chairs, and we've underpowered committee chairs now, and as a result of which, legislation simply doesn't get passed. So why do so few bills become law? Simply because the system is designed to make passing laws incredibly difficult. And we can see that here. Now, the famous Do Nothing Congress, that was in 47 to 48, that still managed to pass 906 bills. The 112th Congress, that's the one from 2 Congresses ago, well, that managed 293. The 113th Congress, the one that's just finished, well, that managed to pull to 296, and a lot of those were essentially window dressing. They were not formative, not substantive legislation. And so what we've got is we've got polarization, which has done for this. Polarization has essentially eliminated the ability of the parties to compromise and cooperate, whereas earmarks have done away, or the death of earmarks has done away with any attempt or any ability for committee chairs to try to coordinate action across committees and so get legislation through. As a result of which, nothing is coming out the other end, and we've got Congress that does nothing. Bear in mind that this was pretty much what the Founding Fathers wanted. The Founding Fathers, looking at this, would be generally quite happy. The only problem is that the rest of the people here, that is us nowadays who are living in the 20th century, look at this and we think, for God's sake, who is going to get something done here? Actually, 21st century. Who is going to organize it? Who's going to pass these laws? Who's going to get things back on an even keel? Well, it's certainly not going to be Congress, and we should know as well that it's probably not going to be the president either. And again, here we can see how this is trending down. Congress is becoming increasingly less productive as people just don't get used to cooperating, and that's a very, very valid point. Here are all of your resources on this. Note that this particular page here has been modernized, so this has changed slightly. So this is now even better. But do make sure that you look at congressional scrutiny, understand the legislative process, committee chairs, and perhaps most importantly, horses, logs, and pork, because that tells you how legislation gets passed in the United States. And that's 13 minutes. I'm quite impressed I got through all of that. I'm going to stop now, and I look forward to your questions. Bring them to me. See you then. Bye now.